In this episode, we've got your old pal Bigfoot dropping by to tell you some very frightening, holiday-themed Dogman stories. And from what I've heard, supposedly, PQ Ribber and Dr. Death will be here to...
My green, dead ears are burning. That means a mortal is talking about me.
Dr. Death, welcome to the show. I heard you have a Christmas Dogman story to tell us.
That's very correct. We have an excellent Dogman story coming up. In fact, we have the best Dogman story coming up. It's about Christmas, but it's good anyway.
Awesome. Do you want to lead off the show?
Well, I'd rather save it till the end, save the best for last, as they say. You tell your little Dogman holiday tales, and then, when you've all done your best, I'm going to bring out PQ Ribber himself, and I'm going to top each and every one of you.
That's okay, I understand. I'll start us off instead then. Steaming Dogman prints in the snow. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened back when I was young, in the early or mid 1970s. My family owned a country home in the Poconos up until 1979. It was actually larger than our normal home, and we would invite friends and relatives to come stay when we went out there, which could be spring, summer, winter, or one time even Thanksgiving weekend. I think all four of us would have preferred living there, but we all had our lives in New York City, which was a 2 or 3 hour drive away. I know some people are willing to commute 4 hours a day, but we weren't like that. Plus, we were just city folk, and we are to this day. We prefer to walk to where we want to go, not drive 2 hours, take public transportation, and then walk to where we want to go. But we did love that old mansion. Except for this one really weird and scary winter vacation, when something that might have been the devil, or might have been the Dogman, came to visit. In the summer, we loved to be at the house because of the grounds around it. We had a tennis court, basketball hoops, a wall to play handball off of, and a baseball field that grass refused to grow on. But more often than not, we'd just wander off into the woods surrounding the place, which I think we also owned. If that belonged to someone else, they never popped up to complain about our presence. We would pretend that the forest was Dracula's woods from the Christopher Lee movies, or else we'd play that it was the forest that the werewolf haunted on Dark Shadows. The only large animals we saw there in any summer were a mother deer and her young one, though. We were over to the west of beautiful Mount Airy Lodge, sort of to the north of Little Summit. There's a lot of state game land over there, as well as a lake preserve and a bog preserve. We had a luxurious home to stay in, and a ton of raw nature all around us. Even back then, we all knew how lucky we were to get to stay at that big old house. In the winters, though, we would kind of go there for the opposite reasons. We would go there hoping to get snowed in so that we wouldn't have to go back to school as soon. Most years, the snow would have already piled up too high on the lawns and in the woods for us to even bother trying to get near them. I do remember making snow angels and snowmen near the driveway, which was kept salted and cleared by the watchman and keeper of the place who lived in our basement. There was one winter when the snow was only an inch or two thick in most places, up to maybe 6 or 7 inches in the deepest drifts. That winter, I remember us going out a lot more than usual, and I even remember one day when we made it all the way out to our woods, which were usually no man's land until the spring. It was there that my friend from school named Vito pointed out that there were these dog or cat tracks, and they were steaming. When I looked at where he was pointing, I saw that it was true. There were tracks, and they looked like they were from a large dog or cat, sure enough, and steam was rising up out of them, as though they were boiling the snow underneath. I suggested that the ground must be warm for some reason, but Vito shot that idea down by pointing out that if it were the hot ground causing the effect, then our footprints would be steaming the same way as the animal prints were. He was right. There had to be something about those prints, or the animal that left them, which was causing what we were seeing. I want to point out that this was all happening on a very bright and brisk winter's day, and that neither of us were frightened by what we saw. I think we probably both imagined the prints had been left by somebody's house pet. Maybe their feet were warm from sleeping by the fire, and then they went out into the snow. Not sensing that we might be in danger, Vito and I decided to follow the steaming tracks. Neither of us were woodsmen or trackers or anything of the sort. It was easy to tell which way the animal was walking when he or she left the tracks, because the older prints emitted less steam, and the newer ones more. The creature must have passed fairly recently, and we were both curious. We wanted to see what had left them in the snow. Like many ideas that make sense to you when you're young, this turned out to be easier said than done. We followed the trail until we hit a wall of vegetation too thick for us to enter. Yet the footprints seemed to disappear right into this impenetrable hedge-like foliage and the thickly packed evergreen woodland beyond it. We began walking to the left, looking for an entrance into the dense part of the forest to our right, hoping we could pick up the trail again on the other side. After a while, though, because we were kids, we got distracted and cold and decided to go back inside for some hot cocoa. The steaming footprints seemed like they were destined to be nothing other than a footnote in my childhood memories, something for me to remember when I was an adult and wonder, did that really happen? But it seemed that the creature leaving those tracks was as curious about us as we were about it, so this story is really just starting. My sister began complaining at breakfast to me and Vito that the devil was walking around her bedroom window the night before, looking in at her and making her cry. This was hysterically funny to me and Vito because we were, at that age. Anything she said, we made fun of her for. Granted, my sister was prone to making up weird stories, but she usually didn't cry over them, so I should have noticed that this one was different. It wasn't that day, but a day or two after that, when my sister complained again about the devil being outside her bedroom window. Vito suggested we go see if there were any devil prints in the snow. He expected we wouldn't find anything outside, and then maybe that would make my sister stop claiming that this was happening. It seemed worth a try because she was beginning to annoy all of us with her stupid devil stories. Well, don't you know that when we walked around to the snow outside my sister's room, there were all sorts of prints in the snow, and some of them, believe it or not, were steaming. Not as much as the prints we had seen in the woods, but these had clearly been left in the night, and they had been cooling off for hours in all likelihood. My sister had not been lying, and she might be able to solve for us what was leaving those steaming tracks in the snow. Vito and I cornered her and questioned her. She told us details for the first time because nobody had ever cared enough to ask before. She said the devil had a dog's head and goat-like back legs. We asked if it had horns on its head, but she said no, it had a dog head, and it seemed very angry. It wasn't just the paw prints that emitted steam. She said he also had steam coming out of his mouth and his nostrils as he stood there outside the window, staring at her. She felt that his extreme warmth seemed to indicate he must come from a very hot place, and every kid knows that the hottest place of all is where the devils come from. It was a natural conclusion for her to make. To me and Vito, though, this sounded like a werewolf, not a devil. We asked her to trade her bedroom for ours upstairs because we wanted to see her devil for ourselves. She and my mom worked out the details because my sister refused to sleep on a boy's bed and so forth, but in the end, Vito and I got to stake out my sister's bedroom, waiting for the werewolf, or dogman, to appear. We stayed up secretly past midnight and saw nothing out of the ordinary. We were supposed to be asleep by then, so we were keeping quiet as we kept our vigil. It was just as I was nodding off at 2:30 or 3 a.m. that Vito let out a squeal. "I see it," he said. "Get the camera." We had this kid's still camera, I forget the name of it, and we had 2 shots left on our roll of film. I could afford to develop 1 roll per vacation, so I tried to make each shot count. I pointed the camera at the window and took my picture, setting off the flash a second before my father burst angrily into the room. Apparently, Vito's shouting had woken him up, and he blew his top. I tried to get around him to take another shot out the window, but he pulled the shade down and ordered me to look at him when he was speaking. I, myself, never got to actually see the dogman with my own eyes, which was totally and completely unfair. I didn't even get to see if he was leaving behind those familiar steaming footprints that all us kids had gotten to see. My father passed a new rule that nobody was allowed to sleep downstairs in that house. He was sick of kids waking him up screaming something about a dog. Nobody saw any more odd things for the remainder of our stay that year, and I forgot to put the film in for development for a few weeks or a month after we got back. When I was finally looking through the shots, there was one toward the end that was all white, basically. I stared at it and stared at it. Then I realized it was a photograph of the flash on that kid's camera, reflecting off the glass from my sister's bedroom window. That was my attempt to photograph the werewolf from hell, and it was a complete failure. We went out to that house multiple times per year for another handful of years after that one, but never again did anyone see any sort of cryptid at all. It was only there for that one particularly mild winter, and maybe the weather had something to do with its presence somehow. I don't really know what else to tell you about the time we kids all saw steaming dogman prints in the snow. Whoa, what did you think of that?
Yeah, that was pretty scary.
I know, right?
Not as scary as my Dogman Christmas story, which is still to come.
Huh?
Later in this very program.
Okay, but right now, your old pal Bigfoot has a scary Christmas dogman story for you. Take it away, Bigfoot. I love this time of year when it starts to get snowy. One of my favorite winter activities is to leave lots of Bigfoot tracks in the snow, then suddenly have them just end in the middle of a field. That really confuses the humans. They still haven't figured out how I do that. What do you guys do to fool the humans in wintertime? Please let me know in the comments. Henry Lee Dogman sent a message. He says he's heading back toward human territory, and once he's in Wi-Fi range, he will be sending us some new scary Dogman stories. So that's something to look forward to. In the meantime, you have me, and I've got some scary Dogman tales with me. Our next 2 stories both took place in December before Christmas. One happened in Wisconsin, and almost certainly stars what we might call the Wisconsin werewolf, a type of dogman cryptid probably first written about by Linda Godfrey in her book The Beast of Bray Road. That story happens in a location you wouldn't normally associate with dogman, i.e. the suburbs. This first story, however, takes place in an even less likely spot than that, which is why we're calling this one Cross County Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a dogman story for you that took place in December in the final year of my mother's life. She was ill, and the doctors told us she might not last until Christmas. She decided she would rather come home to spend her final weeks with her pets and the family. None of us could have expected that her decision would catapult me face to face with the legendary Dogman. This is not one of your Dogman stories that took place in the woods. This one happened in Yonkers, of all places, and in a pretty busy part of it as well. I'm talking about the Cross County Shopping Center. For those of you not from the New York area, Cross County was the first big outdoor shopping mall of its type to open around here. I think it opened in the 1950s because I remember my mother talking about what a big deal it was when it first came around. We had a Christmas tradition related to that mall, and in fact, the tradition is the other reason I had a sighting of the Michigan Dogman in New York. My father passed when I was 19 and my sister was 2 years younger. That was the year Mom started the tradition of taking us to this restaurant that was in the cross-county shopping center. We'd go shopping, usually for boring stuff like underwear, but then it would end up with us getting to eat out. Sometimes during the year we might go to a Chinese food restaurant, but Christmas was the only time we got to go out for steak. My apologies to you vegans. This was the 20th century, and everyone I knew liked steak above all other kinds of dinner. In fact, I still think vegetarianism is a secret plot against mankind, but that subject would be better saved for a different kind of video. So, my mother was always a bit weird with the way she would park her car in any parking lot. Going to cross county was a case in point. She would park in this spot that was way as far away from the stores as possible, so we would have to waste all this extra time walking to and from the place. It just seemed crazy to me. To Mom, though, it all made sense because she was paranoid about the car getting dinged by other cars. So she would only park in a spot far from everyone else, and it had to be blocked off on 2 sides, thereby cutting down the number of angles it could accidentally be dinged from. Her favorite spot was all the way up on the north side of the parking lot. It was the corner spot, and it was really far from the stores. It was across the exitway from the restaurant, though, so there was that. I'm reminded of how careful she was about parking, yet she would just walk out in traffic and almost get us all run down crossing the road to the restaurant. Cars, we must be careful with. Ourselves? That was my mom in her prime. So when we knew this would be Mom's last December, my sister and I decided we should get a steak dinner from that restaurant and bring it home so we could have our family tradition one last time. We knew Mom was only going to eat a bite or two, but even the smell of it we thought might bring a little joy to her. We split up duties and it ended up falling to me to go get the food. I parked in Mom's favorite spot, crossed the busy exitway, and while sitting in the establishment waiting for the order to be prepared, an old friend of mine who I hadn't seen in years happened in with his new wife. I knew they had been dating but was surprised they had married, and we fell into a discussion of how they did it on an impulse in Las Vegas. It was really awesome to forget my troubles and my family's sadness and to hear happy stories, so I got distracted. When their table was called and my food came, we exchanged new contact information and said goodnight. I walked through traffic in a blissed-out state back to the car, then realized I had left my wallet with my car keys back in the restaurant. I dropped the food on the roof of my 1987 Chrysler New Yorker and ran back through traffic to the restaurant. Fortunately, one of the people working there had already spotted my stuff, and he was just coming out the front door to call me back as I arrived there. We both laughed, and I took back my property, relieved and grateful that there are still some good people in the world. While I was thanking the guy, I noticed he was looking past me, and his expression turned into something I couldn't translate. I turned around to see what he was staring at, and I got the shock of my life. Heck, that was the shock of at least 3 or 4 lifetimes. There, on the roof of my Chrysler, was what looked like some kind of a man in a monster suit. Only it wasn't a monster like Frankenstein, it was an animal costume of some sort. My first thought was that it was a dog costume, but dogs don't stand up. It was very man-like, not like an ape or like a bear, but it seemed to have a real, live tail attached, and its mouth and ears moved the way a dog's or a wolf's do. The eyes shone and glowed as you looked at them, but did not seem like glass eyes or whatever. They seemed real. Everything about it seemed more real than any monster costume I had ever seen in the movies. I have to admit, though, I really was not a huge fan of those kind of films when this sighting occurred. I started watching werewolf and Bigfoot shows and movies after this sighting, though, I became very interested to see what could be done with special effects makeup after that night, because I wanted to understand what I had really seen. As much as I hate to admit it, I don't think the technology existed then to create a live performance in a parking lot of a werewolf creature eating takeout steak dinners, because that's what this guy was doing. He was devouring the food and parts of the packaging as well. I was furious, and I ran toward the car shouting foul language the entire way. I was ready to pummel this guy, as you can imagine. Well, I'm lucky I'm a slow runner, or that the guy at the restaurant was faster than me, because he caught up to me and grabbed me from behind in a man hug, and he told me to slow down and look at what I was running toward. The dog-headed, hairy man thing was standing on the roof of my car, ripping and tearing all the food apart with claws and fangs. He was covered in our Christmas dinner, and then, all of a sudden, he noticed the two of us. He turned quickly to glare in our direction, and all of a sudden I wished I could be anywhere but there. Was he gonna run at us? If so, he would definitely catch up to me before I was able to get back inside the restaurant. I started to feel more than a little panicked, and I wasn't sure what to do. Someone driving out of Cross County beeped loudly at the dogman, and it took off running behind some trees that were over there. I couldn't see it anymore once it went behind a tree, but there wasn't any place for it to hide over there. I'm not sure where it could have come from, and I certainly couldn't see clearly where it had gone to. The parking lot is not by any forest. It's just by the Cross County Parkway. It isn't a place where a large carnivore could live, you wouldn't think. The restaurant had already heard the story of my mother, and they were kind enough to make me the same dinner all over again at no additional cost. Talk about a Christmas miracle. When I finally got the food home, my mother was very appreciative, but I have to say, she liked the dogman story better than the food. You want to know why? Because she wanted to know if the dogman had dinged up my car. That was the last time I saw my mother really enjoy herself, and for me those memories will forever be inextricably linked to the time I saw the Cross County Dogman. Holly Jolly Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a dogman story that took place in the suburbs around Christmas. It's kind of a weird story, but it scares me every time I tell it. My parents decided to move to Miami Beach in the mid-1980s and asked me if I wanted their house or if they should sell it. I was still youngish and sort of a hipster back then, so I really didn't know if I was ready to move out of the city to the suburbs yet. I ended up taking the place, as it had been where I grew up, and I loved the idea of finally being in charge of the house. I wonder if I would have taken the place so readily if I had known it would lead to a terrifying encounter with the dogman. My first Christmas as homeowner, I wanted to put up Christmas decorations as my parents had always done. Or I should say, I wanted to do it differently from how my parents had always done it. This was the 1980s, so I wanted to move past the multicolored lights and plastic decorations into the direction of all white lights and decorations incorporating wreaths and real holly, nothing plastic. I had driven past a store in West Allis that had the kind of stuff I was looking for, so when I was ready to do the decorating thing, I drove down there and stocked up on modern, 1980s kinds of Christmas decorations. No more Rudolph with a blinking nose. I was gonna go classy, at least in my opinion at that time. As I was on my way home, it had already gotten dark, and I remember I was on South 116th Street when I saw it. That's a street that's tree-lined on one side, but has houses on the other. The tree-lined side has a park and a golf course, but since I don't remember ever being inside either, I can't really remember which block exactly this took place on. It was either by the park or the golf course, though. What happened was, someone jumped out in the road, blocking me, so I had to slow down. At first I felt a jolt of fear shoot through me, thinking this was about to be a gang attack on my car. I looked around, but I still couldn't see any other figures besides this guy. Where could the rest of them be hiding? I double-checked that all my doors were locked, then looked back at the silhouette in the road, who was now beginning to be illuminated by my headlights. It wasn't a man. It was some kind of a monkey with a dog head, a really tall one, too. I knew the zoo was not far from there, and my initial reaction was that this was an escaped animal from a zoo. I figured it was an exotic creature with a dog-like head that I had just never heard of before. Maybe a kind of marsupial. Its head was not unlike a kangaroo's head, but the thing wasn't brown or tan. It was very dark. Another thing is that it was shaggy like a dog. The fur did not resemble that of a kangaroo at all. It was long, dark, and sort of wavy or curly fur or hair. The eyes hurt to look at. They were bright and felt like laser pointers burning into me when I viewed them directly. My eyes hurt so much that I had to close them and rub them. When I opened them again, I was seeing stars for a while. As my vision began to clear, I realized I did not know where the dog-headed monkey man was any longer. I turned around and looked in every direction, panicked. Was it gone? Was it behind me? To the side? Which side? At the time, I felt so scared that it was beyond any sense of fright I had ever experienced. Maybe this was true panic. It was the most frightening moment of my life because I didn't know what the rules of this game were. There isn't supposed to be an animal that can make your eyes hurt and burn just by looking at you. And had it run off? Was it hiding? Or had it just disappeared? In that moment, I wasn't just scared because I had seen something very large and feral looking. I was scared because nothing that was happening was making sense. It was that fear you get in a nightmare when you realize things are even worse than they had seemed. You thought there was a man blocking your path, but it turned out to be some inexplicable beast that could do things that nothing in nature was supposed to be able to do. The next thing that happened may have actually cracked my brain like a Christmas nut for a little while. This was the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. It was the worst fright of my life, and it almost killed me. You can laugh if you want, but try to imagine being in my place when all of a sudden, upside down, you saw the face of some kind of intelligent demon dog coming down from the top of your windshield to look right at you. It was on my roof. While my eyes had been shut, the thing had jumped to the roof of my car and I never even sensed it. How graceful and light-footed must the creature have been? It was larger than the largest man, yet I didn't feel the car bounce when he climbed on top. I lost control of several body functions that are normally pretty automatically controlled, and I screamed like a madman. I guess I basically was a madman by that point. I jammed my foot on the gas pedal and the dogman was pulled backward as the car jerked forward. I heard and felt him rolling off the back of the car as I drove away. He wasn't so graceful in his exit as he had been in his entrance. I screamed the entire drive home. I remember stopping for a red light and screaming. I was still screaming when I got home, and I sat in the car, trying to get it out of my system so I could get out of that car and go into my house without having a heart attack or without shouting at one of the neighbors. Needless to say, I was a mess. I put up the Christmas lights I had bought and the decorations, bit by bit, over the next few days and weeks. I didn't feel the joy in doing it, but I kept pressing onward anyway. I was still kind of in a state of shock from the Dogman experience. Once I got the white lights up, I found them painful to look at. I think it was psychosomatic, but when I would gaze in their direction, my eyes would burn, just like that night when I looked into the eyes of the Dogman monster. I looked around at all the real holly and pine cones and so forth that I had spent so much money and time on, and for some reason, it all felt a little hollow and empty. Stylish, but hollow and empty. I ended up going to Miami for Christmas to see my parents that year. I guess, for some reason, I just wanted to get as far away as I could from the holly jolly Dogman.
Up next, my scary Dogman Christmas story, read by PQ Ribber, right after this.
Hey, do any of you like these adult coloring books or digital coloring books? I've heard that some people like them, so I made this one. You can print them out and color them by marker or crayon, or you can color them digitally in whatever manner it is that people do things like that. No, I did not draw these images. I'm the editor and the archivist. The price is $2.09 for over 60 images of scary dogmen and werewolves. We got werewolves chasing ladies. This guy here is running from a werewolf that already bit off half of one of his arms, it looks like. It's a crazy and fun, wild time. I guess you can judge for yourself if it's good for kids. I don't know. I don't have kids myself, so I can't really tell you. I know I would have liked it when I was young, but I don't know if that counts because I was a weird kid. Anyway, the link is in the description and the pinned comment, so check it out if you'd like to. Since it's digital, you can actually get it on Christmas Day as a last-minute present.
The Christmas of Dogman. Submitted by an anonymous viewer. Adapted by Peter Bernard. Read by PQ River. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have to tell you about a cabin I rented for wintertime in Pennsylvania that had at least one dogman living in the nearby vicinity. I'm 82 now, and this happened back 12 years ago when I was 70 in the year 2007. I wish that I could go back there each winter, but it's really too cold for me, and I would only want to be there alone. Since I wouldn't be able to keep my trip a secret from my daughter and her family, I wouldn't be able to go there by myself. Being alone with the Dogman was the most fascinating time of my life. I'm going to tell you all about those few short days when I lived near a habituated local Dogman, and then I'm going to tell you about what the Dogman did after my family came out to stay with me. When I first arrived, I have to admit, I was not really in a wilderness state of mind. I spent long hours flipping TV channels and being bored as I would have been at home. Then I saw something go flitting through the snow from my right to my left. I saw it run past one window, then another. It was a dark animal figure moving as fast as a gazelle, but an alarm went off in my head because, at least in my peripheral vision, it appeared to be running upright, like a man. If there were humans in the area, I would hope they would ring the doorbell and be neighborly, not run past like they were part of a SWAT team. I went on full alert and began circling around inside the cabin, watching outside in all directions, yet seeing nothing else out of the ordinary. I spent the next day exploring the location, which was heavily wooded and covered in a blanket of thick, white snow. I did find prints in the area where I had seen something run. Whatever it was, it had feet much smaller than mine. Of that I could be certain. The snow was so deep and melty that it was hard to tell anything else, at least for a non-expert like me. I couldn't tell from the tracks if this thing had run bipedally or on all fours, but I bet an expert could have figured it out. I figured it must have been a deer or a dog and that I had only imagined it running like a man. Nevertheless, my interest had been piqued, and I began spending my nights on watch, looking out into the darkness for anything moving around in the snow. I saw it again 2 more times. It was always around the same distance from the cabin, too far away to make out clearly, and yet too close for comfort. I thought it was the same animal, but it occurred to me it could also be a family or small clan of them. I wasn't seeing them well enough to really know what they were. Sometimes people ask me why I didn't take pictures of them, but it was very dark and I could barely even see the things with my eyes. I wasn't sure it had taken notice of me yet, and I didn't really want to draw attention to myself if I didn't have to. It was probably just hunting in the area, so it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me to get to witness whatever this strange being was. In my mind, it could only be one thing: the Pennsylvania Dogman. A kind of creature that resembles a werewolf or a dog-headed Bigfoot. Although legends and reports of the creature go back a ways into history, they don't officially exist as far as science and wildlife authorities are concerned. Sometimes people ask me if I believed in Dogman before I saw one. I don't believe in anything. I'm an agnostic. I'm careful to not always even believe my eyes. I look at the world, I take in what data I can gather, and then I wonder. Nevertheless, in this case, I was pretty sure what I had was a habituated dogman. However, since I knew nothing about the behavior of this creature, and since it's not even supposed to actually exist, I would say that not only can I not be sure of what it was or how many I saw, but in all likelihood, nobody on the planet would be able to accurately make an educated guess in that direction. Back when I was still a youthful 70, I had my own freedom. I was up in that cabin a full week before my daughter and her idiot husband were able to track me down. That was the moment I regretted not turning the landline off. I had seen them calling and texting my cell phone, but that was easy to ignore. They somehow got the number to the cabin, and I innocently picked up, thinking it was from a friend of mine, someone I had given the number to myself. After explaining to them that I was fine, and I was just on a vacation in the country, they got jealous and began inviting themselves out for Christmas Eve. I explained again that I was on a vacation alone. They asked me for directions. I said I was taking a break from humanity, and then one of my grandkids shouted that they got the GPS coordinates of my cabin from the guy who rented me the place. I began to resign myself to the idea of them all visiting, but then a flash of fear shot through me. What about the Dogman? I may not think much of my son-in-law, but I love my daughter, and her kids are just as dear to me. I didn't want them placing themselves in danger just because they thought I might be having more fun than they were having. "There are bears here," I said over the phone. "Ooh, bears," gushed my moronic in-law, adding, "Kids, Grandpa says there are bears out there." They all cheered. I rolled my eyes. "I didn't say there was a zoo here with bears in it. I was telling you that there are feral, wild bears here." The dummy didn't seem to understand the difference. I told him it was too dangerous and that if he brought my family into a life-threatening situation, I was going to tie him to a tree and leave him for the omnivores. I would have said carnivores, but I'm not sure he's entirely made of meat. He just chuckled.
"Oh, Grandpa, you and your sense of humor again."
He really didn't understand how little respect I had for him, which was probably just as well. Ignorance is bliss. Therefore, he's the most blissful of all. And so, my family arrived in the early afternoon on Christmas Eve, and I plastered on a smile for the sake of the kids. They were cool, and it wasn't their fault who they were born to. It was nice to see my daughter again as well, and I made us all a big lunch. They had brought movies with them that I couldn't get my DVD player to play. The kids hooked one of their devices to my TV and ran some other kind of movie some other way. I don't really remember any of the details. The main thing was they seemed happy, and as long as they were staring at the boob tube, they weren't bothering me about useless nonsense. I showed them my hoard of various brands of microwave popcorn and let them have at it. Why they needed to come out to the country to do the same thing they would have done at home, I will never know, but I hoped they were out of my hair for a while, and I took up a position by my bedroom window to watch for the dog man. I was intensely curious about the thing after what had already gone down. I'm not going to act like I wasn't scared of it, but so far it hadn't made any effort to break in, so as long as I stayed inside, I had no evidence that it would be dangerous toward me in any way. It was a quiet night, other than the endless racket blasting off the TV, and there was nothing happening outside my window. I realized I was dozing off when a scream from my granddaughter shot me directly to attention. I was out of my bedroom in a flash, scanned the TV room to see she was not there, and feared the worst, that she had gone outside in the dark alone. "Where's my granddaughter?" I demanded of the zombies prostrated before their glowing rectangular god. She screamed again, and I could tell it was from my left, from the bathroom. Before I'd taken 2 steps in that direction, she ran out screaming and crying directly into my arms. Now the parents began panicking and shrieking, which is the stupidest thing to do when a kid is upset. I told them calmly to shut up, then asked my granddaughter what happened. I was looking over her shoulder toward the bathroom when she whispered in my ear. She had left the light on when she ran out, and everything looked normal in there as far as I could see from my point of view. What she whispered in my ear was the word monster, and some other things which I couldn't hear because the childish parents were selfishly talking over each other. They reminded me of dogs, all barking because some other dog somewhere had barked. They weren't even looking at each other. They were just pontificating and competing for the volume. I asked them again to please be quiet, and they both started lecturing me even more loudly. They were going to be a problem, possibly for all of us. I needed them to calm down, and most of all, I needed everyone to stay inside. The children were smart enough to listen to me, but the adults were so stupid. They thought their emotions and ego were more important than their own safety or the safety of their offspring. They were incapable of existing in a moment without loudly casting a condescending judgment on it. It seemed they would literally rather perish than shut up for even a second. I blame myself for this. I raised my child wrong. None of the values I taught her had survived her going to an Ivy League university. She had been trained by me to be a human being, a genuine human being, present in the moment and treating others as she would want them to treat her. After 8 or 9 years of undergraduate and postgraduate studies, she was a worker of an industry whose solution to every problem was to freak out and make demands of her employer to take care of her better. She was little more than a pet. She would preen and bask in her self-importance, being the star of the show for years, and then she would have no say when management sent her to the vet to have her put to sleep. She had no instinct left for independence or independent thought. She really wasn't American anymore, at least not in any traditional sense of ingenuity and self-reliance. But she was my kin, and I loved her anyways. It's not our place to judge. It's only our job to love. However, my daughter made it hard to love when she would start gibberishing out long, unnecessary emotionalisms during a crisis when every moment counted. Not only would she and her husband refuse to accept my authority and superior knowledge and experience in crises, they would deliberately thwart my efforts to get things under control. I needed to get the girl away from them into a quiet area, but I knew she wouldn't want to go back to that bathroom. I decided to use child psychology on the adults. "Oh my God, will you look at that?" I shouted at the top of my lungs as I feigned shock and stared into my bedroom, pointing in there. Of course, the two parents ran in there and I slammed the door behind them, locking it. Now, my grandson and I could find out what actually happened to the girl. It was a monster, she told us both. A monster looking in the window at me. I ran into the bathroom and of course nothing was around any longer. The parents were now making as much noise banging on my door to get out as they had been before I locked them in there, but they were easier to block out this way. The girl described what she saw as a very bad dog and a naughty dog that got turned into a monster for being so bad. Her brother thought she was making it up, but I had reason to believe her. Hell, I had a few reasons to believe her. I had to let the parents out, but I waited till the girl had calmed down a bit. I asked her if she wanted to go home, and she said yes. I said I was going to let her parents out of my room, and I wanted her to tell them what she had told me. I did as I said I would do, and she tried valiantly to tell them what had happened, but it became apparent that they really didn't care. It wasn't about them, after all. They just wanted to act indignant and express their own narrative about how I had locked them in the room. I told them it was an accident. They started throwing a fit that I didn't attend to their needs soon enough. I asked them if I should have abandoned a crying girl to help them, and I asked them why they felt they were more helpless than a little kid. I asked them how old they were, and they ignored all of this. I told them that their girl saw a monster. She told them that she saw a monster. Her brother said she's just lying for attention, and both parents agreed with him and started lecturing me that kids make things up. I really enjoyed when they would act like I knew nothing about child rearing and that they were the experts. "Your daughter wants to go home," I told them, and she jumped up and down clinging to me saying, "Grandpa's right." So then I got the condescending lecture about how they weren't going to cancel the family vacation plans because one of the kids was playing a game of make-believe. By this point, it was the children's bedtime anyway, so they jumped in the bunk beds in the guest room and the parents had to sleep in their sleeping bags on the floor, complaining the entire time that they deserved better accommodations. Shaking my head and biting my tongue, I chose a window to sit by and decided to watch for the dog man for a while. It was Christmas Eve. In the morning, the family would exchange presents that they could have exchanged at home, and maybe, with luck, I could get them to leave before nightfall. I dozed off trying to think of ways to convince them that they should go home, while also convincing them that it was their own idea to leave. I was awakened by being shaken awake. It was my son-in-law with a goofy grin on his face.
"The kids are asleep,"
he informed me. "So am I told him. He chuckled his dumb guy laugh and then told me to wake up because he had the most fun thing ever and he needed my help with it. I knew he really meant the lamest thing ever, but I asked him to explain. He showed me a folded-up Santa costume complete with these incredibly cheap and slippery-looking Santa boots. "Alls you have to do," he told me, "is put on this costume and get up on the roof, climb down the chimney, and then give the kids a present or two." "What do I do then?" I asked. "Climb back up the chimney and fly away?" He hadn't thought about how I would make my exit. He said, "Let's just improvise." "I'm not going to do that, you idiot," I answered him. "But Dad," he pleaded, "you have the gray beard. You're the perfect Santa." "Maybe I could play Santa at Macy's," I told him, "but that doesn't mean I suddenly have the ability to climb up on a roof in those vinyl Santa costume boots and climb down my own chimney." I asked him if he understood the difference between movies and real life, and he looked confused. That answered my question. I explained that they build special sets for Santa Claus in the movies, while what he was asking me to do was climb down an actual, filthy, old chimney that I could get stuck in and die. He told me I was very fit for a 70-year-old, so I would be able to pull it off, no problem. The reason that I'm still fit for a 70-year-old, I told him, is because I don't put on slippery vinyl boots and walk on angled roofs while it's snowing. Eventually, the dimwit decided that he'd play Santa himself, and my own daughter endorsed this idea. I'm not even going to tell you how much I spent on her education, only for her to end up marrying this bad Santa impersonator. I had such high hopes for her, but at least she is responsible for co-creating the two best grandkids ever. Once he had the costume on and was ready to begin his idiotic attempt to scale the wall of the cabin, I took pity on him. "Look," I said, "you don't want to go out there. It's not safe out there at night. Just stand in front of the fireplace and your wife and I will wake the kids up and tell them you just came down the chimney, okay?" He was so intent on proving me wrong that he went outside anyway, looking for a part of the house that might be easier to climb. I don't even think it was even a minute later when that dimwit came racing back in the house screaming like he was on fire. The kids were awakened right away and came out to see what the noise was all about. What they saw probably cost my daughter a bundle on therapy for a few years. Their father was standing there, mostly still in the Santa suit. The thing is, the back of his pants were missing, exposing the back of his boxer shorts. Both kids were pointing and laughing, and I was having a hard time holding it in myself. "How'd you manage to lose the back of your pants, Santa?" I asked, and that young man just looked at me, speechless. It didn't seem so funny to me any longer, and I asked him directly. "It was the wolf, wasn't it? You got chased by the dog man, and he bit off the back of your pants like it was a scene from a Three Stooges movie. Am I guessing right?" My question was answered as the creature slammed its face up against the window closest to where we were standing. Every one of us screamed at the hideous features of the dogman, smeared and distorted up against the glass with the wildest expression I've ever seen in the eyes of any dog. I'd never seen it so close before, but this must have been what scared my granddaughter earlier. It was only there a few seconds and then it ran off, but we were all, myself included, completely terrified for the rest of the night. I told everyone we should stay together, and as long as we were inside all night, we should be totally fine. Internally, I prayed that I was telling them the truth. I hung a big blanket over the bathroom window so that nothing could look in at us, but the kids demanded bodyguards as well before brushing their teeth. We all huddled together under blankets on mattresses we tossed on the floor inside my bedroom. It was the only room that had a lock on the door, and I hoped it would be the safest place to stay. If that dogman decided to break through my window, though, better not to finish that thought. Needless to say, once the sun rose, we packed Christmas up and brought it back to the suburbs where it belonged. The kids had a great day, my son-in-law bought us a nice dinner, and then I made my way back up to the cabin to spend more time with Dogman before my own vacation time was up. I never saw him again, but I could feel his presence in the area, so I don't think he left. Maybe he just wasn't as interested in me as he was in my family. I don't know. It's possible he just viewed me as too old and gristly to want to eat for dinner, you know? And so, that is how I spent the Christmas of 2007, or, as my family refers to it, the Christmas of Dogman. Well, was I right, or was I right? That was the best story, wasn't it?
It was pretty scary, all right.
I hope each of you have the scariest, most terrifying and frightening Christmas ever.
Ah, that's sweet.
I hope Krampus punishes you and your family just as much as you deserve.
What?
Of course, I'm only joking.
Yeah, right. Joking.
Merry holidays, whichever ones you celebrate, and let's all keep our fingers crossed that we'll meet again in the new year.
Here, here. Oh, wait, I don't actually have fingers.
Happy holidays and Merry New Year from Dr. Death, PQ River, and everybody at Scary Stories NYC.
Scary Christmas, everybody.
Good night.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button. Or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.